today we have the opportunity to hear from these amazing women and or hear about the ways these amazing women and many other animal rights lawyers are currently using property laws to expand and better the way animals are treated under. As many of us are aware, animals are currently treated as mere property under the law, even though the majority of us view them as family members and family. I've had the opportunity to work along these two for the last about a year now. And I've experienced firsthand the injustices faced by animals and the way our current system wrongs them. So Jill, right here on the right, right on the right left, has been campaigning for animal rights her entire life, but ventured into animal rights law 15 years ago, where she created Riker Law. Jill went to UCLA School of Law, where she took an animals in the law class, which changed her life and led her here. She has had an impressive legal career, which has included animal rights activism, dolphin slaughter, and Beagle Freedom Project, and litigating against corporate giants such as Petco, Costco, Rover, and Pets Only Cremation. Sarah is a more recent addition to the Right There Law team. She started last year as well. She received her JD from the University of San Francisco School of Law, where she was later a legal drafting professor. Her career began in a more public law direction, where she advocated for children and youth and worked for the dependency team as part of the San Francisco City Attorney's Office. Following that work, Sarah spent 5.5 years working in family law. The family law background has been an integral part of Sarah's work with the firm, as she has been spending a lot of time on cases that involve pet custody and in the areas where pet custody and domestic violence exist. However, her love of animals prevailed, and this is where she's going to stay. They're going to speak on the ways they are utilizing and strategizing the current allowances under property law to make the world a better place for animals, and the steps they take to provide a more humane experience for animals.
Thank you, Anna, and thanks for having us. We're super excited to be here. I always love when there's interest in this area of law, because some people are like, what is that even? And when I started this practice about 15 years ago, at the time I had made the decision when I was just graduating UCLA, and everyone thought I was insane. They're like, what? You can't start at what? Like, that's, it's never going to go anywhere. And they were wrong, needless to say, here we are. But one distinction I wanted to make is that, so we are exclusively an animal rights practice. You do hear animal law as like a larger category, and there's, probably several dozen attorneys just in LA County, for example, or San Diego County that practice animal law. The real difference there is that animal law in most instances is like dog bite plaintiff law, right? So they take cases that are technically against an animal, right? So you'll never see us on a plaintiff side dog bite case, for example. You will see us often on the dog bite defense side. So that's really the difference, is that we are constantly looking at which cases can further the rights and interests under the law. And I think when we thought about this panel today, part of the title is the moral dilemma, because we hear a lot about how animals being categorized as property is wrong, and it is wrong, right? But that's what the law says they are. So under the law, for all practical purposes, although we're making some headway, they're no different than inanimate objects. But we know that they're sentient beings, and they feel, and they're our companions. And so a lot of what Sarah and I have been doing, rather than pushing against the property status, because while we were supportive of legislation, and I'd like to think that before my career is over that I will actually see that change, but we've been looking at how can we use existing property laws to further the rights of animals. And that's led to some pretty successful and exciting changes, I think, recently. And I really think I make this distinction a lot. We have seen in history women who were property, right, before, and we've seen people being categorized as property because of the color of their skin. And I feel like animal rights is that next social justice movement, and I'd like to think it will change. But so currently, how do we force some change until the law sort of catches up to reality? And I think using a property status comes up the most when we're talking about damages. So there's plenty of causes of action out there that are for wrongful injury to an animal. There are sort of property terms like conversion, but But you can certainly bring a case for somebody injuring your animal, killing your animal, mistreating your animal. But it comes down to the damages, right? Which sort of feels icky sometimes. You're like, it's not about the money, right? But it's civil litigation. That's what we do. We are litigators, and if we don't get significant damages for our clients, then they can't bring a case, and we don't have a job. So some of the current categories of damages available are replacement value. So that always feels sort of insulting to our clients, but that's what the law is. It's replacement value. So if somebody injures or kills your animal, the law says, okay, well, we can give you the value of what it would be to replace that animal. And so obviously an animal's family is going to say, well, they're irreplaceable, but that's not where the law is. There is availability to get emotional distress, but it's more limited, which we can touch on later. You cannot get emotional distress if somebody negligently, have to be and has to be intentional. So we see replacement value a lot, which is often market value. And a lot of our clients, like us, have rescued animals. So maybe they rescued the animal from a shelter and they paid $350. So when you're only able to recover replacement value, that certainly doesn't make financial sense to pursue a lawsuit. We also see cost of repair, which again, a property term, comes up a lot in our veterinary malpractice cases. If you take your dog to the vet and the vet does something negligent, and then you have to take your dog or your cat or whatever your animal is to a different vet, and you spend, let's say you spend $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 trying to save your animal. The law does recognize that you can be reimbursed for that. They call it cost of repair. So we use that a lot, and I feel like that's been successful, but it's limited, right? Because even if you have somebody that spent $20,000, it's a lot, but it's not a lot, right? It still doesn't feel like it's not going to justify necessarily filing a litigation case that goes on for a year and costs a lot of money. So then we see lost profits and like brand value, which really kind of highlights the moral dilemma that we're talking about, because lost profits are really property focused damages. So those are going to come into play when it's some kind of working animal. So maybe that dog was used for breeding and super high end breeder, or it was a show dog. So it's challenging for us because we're sort of like, we don't really support that world. But
really,
we don't at all. Yeah, PC here. But that animal, right, is also entitled to representation. So we have a current case that we took 2 years ago, and I remember almost declining the case because it involved a very valuable, financially valuable dog. As we got to know those clients, I'm actually super happy we took the case, and they're amazing people. But it really highlighted how, like, are we making these arguments in court for lost value, and is that somehow going against our own like code of moral ethics, and kind of trying to figure out how do you do both? And so we get creative, which Sarah's going to talk about some comments from some judges maybe, but we have a case where we're arguing lost profits, and the damages are significant. They're in the $300,000-$400,000. But at the same time, we make sure that the way we write complaints, the way we write motions, and we always refer to them as family companions. We never use the word it, we use the animal's name. And a lot of times you're in court in front of a judge that has never had an animal case before. It's becoming more likely now. When I started 15 years ago, they were like, I'm sorry, what's this case about? Like, so you're seeing it more and more, but still, like, there's a lot of times where I think for you too, you're in court and you're the first person that's really a judge has ever seen in their court advocating on behalf of an animal. And same with other attorneys. They're like, oh wow, I looked you up and this is like what you do. This is the thing. So it can be empowering because you're also educating people along the way. And I think that's like a really exciting part of what we do. Some other categories of damages, and with a little bit more leeway, I would say, is, and Sarah's going to speak on some of these, is future care. And I really like this one because I think it comes with an inherent point that animals are not just property. So future care, let's say you take your animal to the vet, and that vet does something that makes that animal disabled. So instead of the animal unfortunately dying, they live, but they're disabled in some way. And if that animal's young, let's say they're 1 or 2 years old, they might have a lifespan of 15 years. We argue that the vet sent on the hook for the future care. And Sarah, I don't want to talk too much
She
about this.
just gave the entire example.
But I'll talk about the actual case. So future care is big. I said emotional distress, less likely, still available. We constantly try to seek it. Punitive damages, which is, damages to punish if the behavior is really bad. I feel like Sarah's been really successful recently arguing to keep punitive damages in our cases. And then also false advertising, which is new for us. And it's, I think it's been a really good addition to our arsenal. We sue corporations like PetSmart, Petco, Rover, for false advertising. So you have a lot of these big businesses that advertise how they treat animals and how much they love animals and how safe it is, and animals are like our family. And then there's all kinds of horrible things that go on, and you try to bring it to their attention. They're like, oh yeah, well, animals are just property. So false advertising has been huge because it comes with attorney's fees. Sarah's going to talk a little bit about that. I kind of already mentioned the types of cases we do. So wrongful death, which sometimes can be a false advertising case, that wrongful death case. We do dog bite defense, both civil and administrative, which we've been doing a lot lately. Whenever a dog gets accused of something, there's often a civil case, right, for money, but before that, there's an administrative case where it's really about whether or not that, say dogs, it's usually involving a dog, whether that dog should essentially be euthanized. So we'll do administrative hearings for cases that and sometimes the cities just feels like a strong vendetta against the animal. And these administrative hearings it's like a kangaroo court, hearsay's allowed, there's really low standards. So it feels like a lot of really unjust decisions coming out of those administrative hearings.
And then we do writs when those hearings go the wrong way.
Yeah, exactly. So if you lose at the admin hearing, which unfortunately is common, I think we have a good track record, but there's a strong bias, especially if your dog's a pit bull. It's sort of like guilty until proven innocent, but they won't let you prove they're innocent because they won't look at any of your evidence. They only want to look at,
they won't let you bring an expert in, but they'll let their expert in.
It's crazy. So then we will appeal that decision, which takes us into civil court. It's called a writ of mandate. And I guess last thing I'm going to say before I turn it over to Sarah is, I think one thing that I love, and I think that's really like inherent in the way that we practice, is I started Reichner Law Group to have autonomy in the selection of cases. I was clerking at the DA's office and I was doing like animal cruelty. And I noticed, I think for a lot of attorneys, especially early on, you don't have a ton of say in what kind of cases you take. Like you take what your boss tells you to take, whoever your boss may be. And so for me, it was really important. If I was going to do this, I wanted to be able to make my own decisions. And then now that I'm able to do that, and I have other amazing attorneys that work with me, we're constantly looking at cases for how they can overall change the landscape. So we're very forward looking. We look at a case and we're like, okay, should we take this case? How does this fit into our overall agenda to chip away at the property status of animals? Some of the moral dilemmas we face, I kind of mentioned breeding. Another one that comes up a lot is when you have somebody contact you that bought their dog from a breeder, and the case may be against a company or a veterinarian or whatever it is. And so at first you're like, well, I don't necessarily want to represent somebody that bought from a breeder, but if you take a hard line, then you also don't get an opportunity to go after the breeder, right? Let's say there was something wrong with breeding and the way things are done. So I think overall what's been happening for us is there's a lot of animal rights attorneys now, amazing animal rights attorneys across the country. And many of them are my colleagues, and I respect them. And I think there's a little more hard line in the sand sometimes of like, oh, I can't take that case because I thought it was bought for a breeder. And so I think the way we do things has been a little bit different, which is allowing us to take on more cases and sort of get creative with our arguments. And really the goal is in civil litigation, the higher damages award, the better, right? So if you look at case law, it's like, well, most animal cases settle for 40,000, 50,000 versus, wow, look at this. There's cases that involve an animal that settle for 300, 400, 500,000. So our goal is sort of get that amount up, even though at the end of the day, it's not about money. I think I'm good. Let's see. A couple ending points is that alongside being obviously a civil litigation firm, there's other opportunities, I think, like this, like where we come and we speak and we try to teach people about what we do. We're also really supportive of legislation. We want to speak on behalf of different campaigns where legislation is getting passed or help draft different laws that can change the rights for animals. And I think even though it feels sometimes emotionally draining because we're fighting a system that hasn't caught up yet, and sometimes people look at you like, oh, you're like a crazy animal lawyer. It's also really empowering because I think we have really good relationships with most of our clients. There's the occasional, of course, for any firm that we don't, but our clients are always really happy to find us and they feel grateful, like, wow, I was looking everywhere, I didn't know this existed. So we end up with really great relationships. And then same with colleagues. So you kind of know your people when you meet them. And I met Sarah only a year ago, which feels crazy because she came in and was like, wow, she's singing to my gang. When Autumn interned for us, it was like, these are our people. So in that regard, I think it's incredible. I'm glad it's expanding. I love seeing the interest and here to answer any questions.
So brief background from me is, as Autumn mentioned, I practiced family law for 5.5 years. I went to college in Pennsylvania and then I went to law school in San Francisco. So I was up in San Francisco. I did some work in dependency. I did some work with the state attorney's office. That was all in law school. And I started litigating domestic violence cases as a law student my second year, which was wild, actually, like thinking back that I did like a TV trial for a 15-year-old client in law school. And I won, which is great. But so I kind of started realizing that I loved litigation and I loved helping people. And then I graduated and I did a bunch of random things, worked in compliance, finally found my way to family law. And I felt like, okay, I like litigation. I'm really enjoying litigation. I'm really good at it. And I did a lot of domestic violence, but I was also feeling like I'm just helping rich people like stay rich. And that's like what you do in family law for the most part. I mean, you do some domestic violence stuff and that feels really good because obviously like there's some really bad people out there and you want to protect your client. But it was most of the time just like helping people stay rich. And it just didn't feel good. I just didn't feel like I was doing anything worthwhile. I went vegan in 2016, right after I graduated from University of San Francisco, after like watching a million documentaries. And so I was kind of in my personal life an activist and had adopted dogs and always loved animals, volunteered at the SPCA and all of that. And so I was kind of trying to figure out how do I make helping animals my entire life and not just like a side thing that I do, not just Instagram, like networking, dogs who need homes, but like my entire being. And I met my fiance at a dog park. He had a dog from the same rescue, long, cute story. But
That's the dream.
the dream. And he's also vegan, again, the dream. And he is the reason actually that I was able to like reevaluate my career because I had someone who was more supportive. I mean, Jill was so brave and like just jumped right into animal work and doing her own thing. But I was one of those people who was like, I can't start my own firm. I'm scared. Like, what if I don't make enough money? Like, how do I survive? And I was looking at jobs with PETA, but they take very hard lines. And for me, it was just not quite the right fit. I mean, they're wonderful and I'm so supportive of them, but again, just not quite the right fit for me. And I was living in Los Angeles. I was like, I can't afford to take some of these amazing opportunities. I couldn't afford that. So I started reading books, like how do I make this transition? And I found out like there are private law firms who practice animal rights work. No way, that is not a thing. And then I Googled around and I found Jill. And it was just like, this is my person in a work environment type way, obviously. And when I left my law firm, I was working at a very prestigious family law firm in Los Angeles who trained me like so well. I'm very grateful. I know how to take depositions. And I'm grateful. She's really good. And like I learned a lot about discovery and like I really, for me it was very helpful because I needed that like foundation. And when I left them though, I remember they were amazing. Most of them were very supportive. There were a couple main partners and most of them, like I said, were supportive, but one said, that's not a career. Good luck. Like there's no future there. It's like, cool, thanks so much. Great. But obviously there is a future here. I had 12 consultations for new clients this month alone. Like we are flourishing and Jill and I just had a really amazing conversation. I'm going to be partner. So it's been like an amazing, crazy year and fast tracked on the partner track. And then my fiance and I are actually starting an animal rescue as well on the side. And I'm the crazy wolf dog lady. I have 4 wolf dog rescues, and that's kind of my passion. I mean, so much so that my fiance bought me a wolf onesie yesterday. I'm like that crazy person. But like getting back to what Jill was talking about, I just wanted to kind of give you that context. It's important. The family law step will be important as I explain more of what we were talking about earlier. But to jump off of what Jill was saying with the damages stuff, with replacement value, this is like a really uncomfortable one for us, because when we have people who come to us who have a dog who they bought from a breeder, there's like $4,000 dogs, $10,000 dogs. One dog came to us, it was a little Frenchie, it was $20,000 dog. I almost threw up. I was like, this is disgusting. I can't believe they bought this dog from a breeder. And by the way, the poor dog did die, and it was so sad. And I was like, okay, I don't like that they bought this dog from a breeder, but I also really hate the breeder more because this poor dog suffered and died, and everyone around, so the whole family suffered. So taking those cases can be really difficult for us, but there's also obviously a higher replacement value when you have a $20,000 dog than my dogs, who cost essentially nothing. But in your heart, you're like, matter, my dogs are priceless to me. And so that's something we grapple with in every single case. But when we have cases from people who bought a dog from a breeder, we are able to argue a higher replacement value. And something that we're also toying with is like Autumn's dogs are purebred dogs, but she rescued that. And so we could argue something like replacement value based on the market value of what a lab would be from a breeder, even though it was a rescue dog. So we're kind of toying with that. It's not necessarily like something we've done in court as to like an adopted dog as a purebred, but it's something we're working on. And we're always coming up with these creative ideas, and I'll get to that in a second too. And then kind of related to that point is this idea of investment value, which feels really gross to like use that term when you're talking about your beloved family member, but the law is saying that they're property, right? So if you invest in your house and you do a new bathroom or whatever it is, that increases the value of that property. And so we've been arguing in these animal law cases and these animal rights cases that you invested spay, neuter, vaccines, training, all of these things, special diets, supplements, like all of these expenses. I mean, loving these animals the way we do, it's not cheap, right? It's not just like buying a kibble and like throwing them in your yard. Like you're spending thousands and thousands on your animals. And so trying to argue like you're investing in that animal, and then, in the tragic cases where the animals passed away, that you should be compensated for all of that investment. It's not something we've had a court case on yet, but it is something we've done in settlement, and it seems to be working really well. Yeah, it seems to be working and increasing our, we got a pretty high increase in the settlement offer in one case after we pushed on this. So again, not like something we try in court, but something that we're really excited to try. Yeah. And then kind of another similar issue is this idea of future care that Jill was talking about. So we had a case with a dog who became disabled because of the negligence of a veterinarian, really, really heinous. And of course, on top of that was fraud because they lied about the injury, but that's a separate part of that. This dog is very young, I think a year old, and is a medium-sized dog, so it's probably gonna live 15 years. And we are pushing on the idea that this dog, because of his disability, which actually made his other conditions worse, he's lost a limb. Yeah, and it's a 3-legged dog. He already had arthritis in his other leg. So now like that loss is putting more pressure on those other legs. And so he needs to have physical therapy for the rest of his life. And the cost is significant. We actually settled this case for $165,000, which is the highest that I've ever seen in my years for settlement. Like it wasn't even a litigation case yet. Which is why but yeah, really incredible, and I'm hoping that we'll have more and more cases where we can push on that future cost. When we deal with these cases, we always try to settle the case first. One, because there used to be a code section where you had to give 90 days notice. We read it now as not requiring 90 days notice, but we give it anyway in sending out a representation letter to whoever we're going to sue. And that starts a claim essentially. And then we discuss with the insurance company whether we can settle it. Obviously, it's always cheaper for people, for clients to settle the case, right, than file a lawsuit. So hopefully we can settle the case and help people move on and focus on their animal versus spending years in litigation. Like that's always our goal. Some attorneys are probably just like, no, let's sue, like gung ho, but we're always trying to keep in mind the cost benefit of suing because these cases can be so expensive and sometimes the damages aren't going to be 50, 60, 70,000. And like Jill had mentioned, you know, an example of like a $20,000 case of cost of repair. If you spend $20,000 in court and you get $20,000, what's the point, right? As much as sometimes people and some clients don't care. They're like, I don't care, I want to sue because I want to make a point. I want them to be held liable. I want discovery to other, you know, depositions and understand what happened to my dog or cat. So sometimes the point isn't the money, but obviously most people like it's a big consideration if they suggest spend $50,000 on their dog. So that's another thing that we grapple with. Hopefully more cases with future care costs that we can have. And then the other thing that Jill mentioned was false advertising cases. And so, for example, we've sued PetSmart. We have an active litigation case. It's public knowledge.
I think it's like our third lawsuit.
Is it?
Yeah.
So we have two actually active right now, and they're both false advertising cases. And basically, PetSmart advertises that they provide 24/7 care for dogs in the boarding facility in the Pets Hotel. Our client, in this case, and again, like I said, this is all public information, found her dog dead. They found her dog dead one morning. So you don't just find a dog dead in their kennel if you have 24/7 care. It doesn't make any sense, right? So our argument is that this is false advertising. There's a lot of pushback in the case, obviously, because they are saying that, you know, the services agreement is controlling and it doesn't include 24/7 care. But anyway, that's a little more detail than we probably need to get into. So the reason we are pushing on false advertising is one, it's completely and totally unfair to say that you're going to provide 24/7 care and then not provide it, and then try to use a services agreement with a giant corporation and individuals who don't have the opportunity to bargain for that contract. But also because the damages that we can receive when we go in through a false advertising angle, in addition, of course, to replacement value, we're arguing conversion and all these other causes of action. But you can get attorney's fees. And in general, in these cases, you can't get attorney's fees. You can get costs if you win, but costs are significantly less than attorney's fees. We've actually had this conversation like 12 times this week.
So
What do you mean? Yeah, and so unless you have false advertising claim, you cannot get your attorney's fees. And that can be $50,000 more if you go through a trial, right? Maybe more, maybe less, but that's a significant amount, and it makes litigating the cases much more manageable for clients if you have false advertising. And relatedly, you can also get injunctive relief, which generally speaking, like you're not going to get. So basically, stop advertising that way, right? And that's actually going to make a change and further the interests of the animals, which is our. Jill already talked about intentional infliction of emotional distress. I don't think I'm gonna harp on it too much, but it's something we are still putting in our complaints, even though we get pushback every time, and sometimes we lose on a demurrer, and that is unfortunate, but it's still important to us to push on the idea that this is more than just a chair. You know, this is an animal, this is a part of your family, and you did experience distress, and sometimes we have these fraud cases that are part of a vet malpractice case. And so then we're arguing that the injury was really directed at our client because it's, you know, fraud essentially, or false advertising. Same thing. We're arguing that that injury was directed to our client, and that is a way in the door. It's having mixed results. It kind of depends on the judge, and so we're still pushing on it, and hopefully we'll, you know, have some more success. And then the last thing I wanted to kind of touch on is related to the family law stuff. So we do custody cases. This is also a little bit, I feel like, of a moral dilemma sometimes, because I think to myself, okay, there are so many dogs who need a home. Like, why are we fighting, or cats? Why are we fighting over this cat or this dog when you can go adopt another and give that dog a great life? And especially, I think we have that moral dilemma when it appears that people are both decent owners.
Right.
So we try to take on the cases where we're like, no, this person is not a good owner, you know, parent, and should not have an animal. There are a lot of those cases where we have a drug issue or not a stable job or something else that makes it nervous for us as animal rights attorneys to like let a dog be a person's care.
Yeah, and just to be clear, it's not that we're trying to go in and take that animal away from that person, but we don't have that authority, but it's the cases where, let's say our client's position is that somebody stole their animal, right, for ulterior motives, right, and the person that stole them has a drug problem, it's just not a good place, and so then we're like trying to get the animal back from them, for example, or let them keep the animal if the other person's threatening to come take the animal, so it's, that's what it comes up a lot.
Good clarification.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these cases are like old roommates. This is my dog. No, this is my dog. Or ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend, where they weren't married, so the dog is, or cat. It's a dog, but yeah, cat cases too, of course.
Or really sorry for one that living like lost and found. So it's not always romantic. Sometimes it's like a rescue, the dog's shipped to a rescue, and the person who adopted the dog has had the dog for 5 years, and the dog gets out for some reason, and because the dog was shipped to the rescue takes the dog back. And so then it's an argument of, well, who owns the dog? The rescue originally, or the person who's been the dog's parent for the last 5 years? So that's sometimes custody too.
We have a lot of different types of custody. I guess I say the romantic relationships because it tends to come up more for me. But there's also cases, we had one where we had a client who's very concerned about the rescue and didn't think that the rescue was legitimate. She was fostering a dog for them. And they did say some really concerning things about the value of the dog. And so we wanted to try to help her basically keep this dog because it seemed really weird that they were focusing on the value of the dog. And it was a Doberman rescue. So it's like, okay, maybe there is something weird going on here, especially when, you know, some of the dogs weren't considered or spayed. So we can sometimes have cases where it's not necessarily like romantic, but it's still a custody case. But the romantic or the family cases where like, siblings or exes have recently been turning into domestic violence cases. And apparently this never happened to Jill before I joined.
Sarah like came from family law and brought it in the door or something because I never had seen them, and now we have them every other week, it feels like. So
Yes, and so one case we filed a domestic violence restraining order because the other party was abusing our client and withholding her dog, very clearly her dog. All of the evidence supported that this was her dog. And basically withholding the dog to abuse her. And we were able to file a restraining order and actually get the dog back to her and settle the case before we had to go to the trial, although I was ready. The morning of basically is when it settled. And so my background in the domestic violence world has been really helpful in these cases, but it does bring up some interesting nuances because sometimes we have a civil case going on that maybe we filed, and this has been the case more often than not. We file a civil case, we file the complaint, and we file a, basically a request for order. It's a writ of possession. So it's an interim injunctive relief, if you will, where you're trying to get the animal back to your client sooner than trial. This trial can take 3 to 5 years or whatever it is. And so what happens is often on the other side, they're like, oh, well, there's domestic violence and we're going to file a DV case. And I think that these attorneys come in and think they're an animal law firm, they don't know how to deal with DV. And so we're going to just like, get the dog or cat back through the family law.
scare them away, basically.
Mm-hmm. And in the family law court, in a domestic violence request, you can ask for an animal to be a protected animal. And so they're trying to utilize that basically to take an animal and maybe the cases we've had wrongfully to take an animal and keep an animal. And so then we're arguing with the civil and the family court, family court, you can't decide on ownership of this animal because there's a civil case. And then we have to kind of balance how we're dealing with that and how we're arguing that this is property, but also maintaining our, morals and also maintaining like the truth of the case, which is this is a family member. This is, not just it and the lamp. So that's been a really interesting area that's been growing. Yeah. Despite me not wanting it to.
We make Sarah do all of them. Yeah, she's really good at them. She's like, I hate these cases. Like, you're so good at them. You just have to keep doing it.
Unfortunately, yeah. So we had this happened very recently, actually, this month. We had a case that turned into a TV case. We had filed our writ, and then the family member filed another domestic violence case, and I went and I just trounced them. It was great. And then they lost their TV case, and we won our writ. So now the cat is happily and dog back with our client. Sadly, had police and all kinds of things that happen while this cat's in the other person's care. So it always feels good when we find out. I mean, that sounds weird also. I'm happy that the cat is back with our client. And I'm also happy that there's like this like justification or
Like you knew it was the right thing to do.
yeah, we knew it was the right thing to do. Like this poor cat has been suffering. And so that again, some moral issues there, but happy that the cat's
And then we always have obviously really nice thank yous when we get a lot of reunion photos, like
so many.
we have a lot of cases where the end result is, oh my God, this person that's been trying to get their animal back for so long finally gets their animal back and get the like the faith
feels
that's
so
yeah, and
good.
they're like, thank you. It's super rewarding.
So that's all I have.
Yeah, and we're open for questions or if you want us to talk any more about any of the categories, but that's in a nutshell.
I just want to say, like, thank you guys for being here. Like, it's so nice to hear, like, to see attorneys actually litigate cases like this.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I wanted to ask you guys a few questions. So you brought up so many good points. Let's see. What thoughts do you guys have about city and county shelters euthanizing at a rate that's just astronomical? If it's like statute based, like how, I don't understand how they can continue getting away with that. It's something I keep up with.
So
Yeah.
I want to jump in. I know probably a lot of thoughts, but we both like hate the shelter situation. It's really upsetting to us. We've been working with another team member to try to figure out if we're going to file a lawsuit against some of these shelters, but it's really hard to do, and you have to go through like tons and tons of data and really be able to show a pattern, and that's really time intensive, obviously. So it's hard to do that because you need to find a plaintiff basically who's willing to do that and pay for all of that time.
And they have standing sometimes.
Yeah.
Got a lot of advocates who are like, let's sue
Let's
the
sue
Orange
them.
County Shelter. And like, well, you have to have adopted an animal and there had to have been some wrong that's directly connected to these larger wrongs. So sometimes it's an issue, but we're
very
Getting there,
interested
yeah.
in it. Yeah, and one shelter in particular, DeVore, I live in Temecula and Jill lives near Becky. And so DeVore and Riverside are kind of like our closer areas and also just some of the worst, frankly. And DeVore, we have a team member who's kind of gotten in there and we're trying to change something from the inside. At least walk the dogs, because those dogs are never let out of their kennels. Change their water and wash and clean their water dishes. Give them some sort of warmth because they're basically in these steel cages no matter like the weather. Give them some blankets, give them something, give them some toys. So we're trying to work inside the system just because it is so cost prohibitive and difficult to find a plaintiff to file, but we are ready.
yeah, for sure. And I think it's getting closer. I mean, there's some groups doing some test cases and I think the shelters are feeling less insulated than they used to be. So yeah, I think in collecting data and trying to work with them too, you also see like what is going on. I think one of the, because you brought up euthanizing specifically, I think a recent change was like providing notice, like longer notice, giving more opportunity for the dog to get adopted, being more transparent with who you're euthanizing, why.
The law on that, like the not being able to euthanize, it basically is suspended. It's my understanding. So
Yeah.
they don't really have to follow anything.
The Hayden law used to be pretty protective. It still exists, but they sort of gutted some of the most meaningful parts of that law. But
Just frustrating.
yeah, and I think, but so there's the big picture, which is like, let's file a lawsuit, like let's like stop, let's get injunctive relief against the shelter, which I think we're certainly gearing up for. I think it's on our radar a lot. But also, I was LA based. My practice was LA based for the first like 14 years. So we were really familiar with the LA shelters, a lot of them. And then because of our work doing administrative hearings, animal control was really used to us coming in and sort of fighting with them. And then if we would lose an administrative hearing, we were filing a lot of writs against, the animal shelter, not the shelter, but I guess LA Animal Services. And so, but through that, we started to get decent relationships with people in charge. They're like, okay, like we don't want to keep like getting sued here. Like how can you have, so we've become like sort of a voice behind the scenes to try to help them affect change, which is always feels really good to me. And I think sometimes it's like gaining respect in the field. And I think for so long, these issues went untouched because like nobody does this. So it's like, how can we file more lawsuits? You know, it just doesn't,
And
it
the
did
people who
exist.
do it get burned out.
Yes, there's a huge burnout, because it's your morals are really in there. It's devastating to lose, right? Like if you lose a case and then the animal's gonna be euthanized, you're just like, oh my God, like. So I guess long story short, we have a ton of opinions on the matter. I also do think, dare I say, that things are about to change, but I think we're at least moving in the right direction. There's a lot of people super heated about everything
Lot of
that's going on in the
protests.
shelter. Yeah, I think we'll see more of that in coming months and years.
Yeah, of course. I do have one more question, but someone else, then I'll ask him.
Okay, I'm really interested in the false advertising aspect of the business work, just because that's been coming to head. Like, I think Supreme Court lawsuits, there was one about, is it the cost of treatment?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's just a lot of those coming in place, so I'm wondering, how you obtain discovery for those suits, considering all of like the ag laws and the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, making it difficult for people to document the abuses, so I was wondering if you had insight on that.
Well, so I would say our cases for false advertising so far haven't really been related to like animals in agriculture, and that probably helps us a lot. A lot of our cases, well, I'd say all of them right now are like against veterinarians or against PetSmart, Rover,
But larger companies.
So we haven't had at this point an issue with discovery, and in fact, although a little bit, did have a deposition this week where the vet basically tried to say like, you can't get this information from me about, you know, what I'm spending on marketing and all this, and it's not relevant. It certainly is, and we're pushing on that. And depositions, right? Relevancy is not a reason to not let your client answer. And so that helps us a lot, doing a deposition versus trying to do written discovery where they just weasel out of it and you have to file a motion to compel, and it just takes so much more time.
Yeah, I think they do push back a bit in the false advertising cases, like we had to sign a protective order to get a copy of the video footage, which was gonna show like what exactly happened to the animals. We haven't done a false advertising case against like a factory farm, for example, like a huge up on my list, like like one of my like dream cases. I mean, I wish there was no need, but I think that the restrictions from the ag gag laws come up a lot more there. Although my understanding, I feel like I've been so immersed in our cases lately that I'm like behind, but I feel like the challenges to the ag gag laws are going well. So I feel like they're becoming less of a roadblock than they used to be. And I'd like to think that continues to move in that direction. Thank you. But I love that you're interested in it, because I think it's an area that really, really needs focus.
Hi, thank you so much again for coming. This has been very informative. I'm a co-chair of Salva, so if you saw me taking pictures just for social media and everything.
That's great.
We love it. Spread the word. I'll probably get one at the end of you guys actually smiling and not talking, but yeah, this has been great. So I did have a quick question on the false advertising part as well. I know that a lot of like pet foods, they're finding a lot of toxic materials in these foods, and it scares me because I'm a dog owner and lover, and I'm always trying to find him like the right food, but it's like you don't know, if they're testing these foods or what's going on. Have you guys ever brought a case for false advertising, like with the foods?
So it's funny, we're both like, so
We're thinking of the case.
Because what immediately came to mind was the recent case. Say this again.
Is there a couple?
Oh,
Okay. Well, so we can't give too many details because it was settled.
Okay, so
I worked too that we did on dog food.
Yeah, I don't think that's a great example.
which one?
The one, I'm looking at.
Oh, right. So we recently did bring a case against Purina, and that involves false advertising. And so where our experience has been like, so obviously arguing damages like any other civil case, but really trying to affect change in the labeling, right? So part of our settlement discussions that were really important to our client were, don't say this on the label if it's not this, right? And so I think false advertising, and I think like maybe failure properly, when we were like getting very creative.
There's a lot of pushback, especially with those big companies, right? They don't want to change how they're advertising, and so I think sometimes you have to sue. In that case, and I don't feel like we made the change that we really wanted to.
I think,
But I do think the more that these, like, against, for example, like Purina or other big companies, like the more that this happens to them, I think the more and more inclined they will be to change. And then if we, those again are just so, right, pushing them.
And
Gonna
it's
have to pay out
expensive,
a
they keep
lot.
paying out to settle a case and then sign confidentiality because they don't want anybody to know. I think the more that keeps happening, it's sort of like, it's too expensive not to change, right? Like change your labeling or like do better, right?
Maybe we'll have a client who is like ready to file and can really push, but I think that's gonna come up more, and especially because there's a bunch of statistics that we just learned. Actually, I think that Autumn found a bunch of statistics for our Amicus brief that we did, but basically about like how, how much animals are becoming prevalent in American families and how much people are spending on them. And I think that's going to become another area. And I'd love to take on more pieces against the pet food companies because I think they need to be more upfront with what's in the food, like what testing they've done. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to do that.
And I think just to give it a little context too, they hide behind the like warnings in small print. So like if something, says, edible, safe, highly digestible. And then in like fine print, it's like, make sure you always supervise your animal when they're eating this, right? And like
large chunks.
Like realistically, like I think for us that have dogs, like you want to be able to be like, here's a treat, or here's like a bone or something, and I'm like working over here, like I'm here, but or for something that they say it's highly digestible and it's not, they hide behind those like fine, well, look, it says you have to but it's misleading, right? So I think there's going to be like a gap, right, between like false advertising and like misleading advertising, because some things they say, it's not technically false, but it's really misleading if you don't read the fine print.
Which brings me to like a related point is when we do these false advertising cases, so we're suing under California legal remedy.
CLRA, the Consumer Legal Remedies Act.
So we use a lot of acronyms and I feel like I forget what the real thing is, but we also relatedly generally include claims about unfair business practices, which is slightly like broader, right, than just false advertising. So that's another in. And then the other thing that we just came up with in another related case is an idea of negligent misrepresentation, because, for example, some people have the issue where they may like not actually use the services of the big company, but they are relying on, like, say they bought through Amazon. I'm just gonna come up with an example. They bought the product through Amazon, but it's through maybe a reseller, but it's that company's product, and they relied on like the company's website representations. Sometimes they'll try to argue that you didn't buy through the company or you didn't buy the product that's company's product, and so there's kind of like these ways that they try to wiggle around. And so using something like negligent misrepresentation, which doesn't require that you're a consumer in their company, basically, is like a way to get around it. And I'm coming up with like an example in the fly because I can't give exactly the example I want to give. Yeah, but that's kind of an idea that we've been playing with, and I think it's going to be really successful.
Thank you. And one other question, so how do these cases come about? Like, does it only happen once an animal is injured, or are third-party companies actually going out and testing these products and then kind of reporting back? Like, just curious on that aspect.
From our standpoint, most of our clients are individuals. We do have a lot of rescue clients, but that's like in a different context. So we do like contracts for rescues. We help with disputes that come up. Like we have specific rescues that are like, they like to say that they're like in-house counsel because they have this sort of attorneys on standby. But other than that, most of our clients are individuals. Other than like we have a lot of activists that will come to us and they're like, I want to sue this shelter, or I want to sue this company. How do I do that? But I don't think we've had sort of an example like what you're saying.
So when the individual comes, right, like their animal has been injured or killed. So
Yeah,
that's
usually
usually and that's how you have, and I was gonna say damages, but that's also how you have standing to sue, right? You have to have something happen to you, essentially.
Okay.
So-
And then do you bring an expert in to kind of show like, okay, the food caused this, like
love
let's
our experts.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we bring an expert in. And one of the cases that Autumn was kind of hinting on, it's like similar but different, but the food in that case had made our client's dog really sick, and they had sent it actually for testing through the FDA that confirmed it was salmonella. And so we ended up, I can't remember who the expert was right now, but we basically were using like the testing from the FDA to like confirm that there was salmonella in it, to in place of expert testimony because it, it was right there. So I don't know that everybody thinks to involve the FDA, but like these clients were very like savvy and they came to us with like the test results, like they already had them.
Yeah, I
right? So
never even heard of that, being able to send it to the FDA, but that's awesome.
I think there's a process, like you file a complaint where you say you suspect salmonella. I think there's certain categories that the FDA cares more about.
And the other, this brought up two kind of related but unrelated things that just jogged my memory. So another way we're trying to expand the animals' rights is not allowing clients to be dissuaded from filing like a Better Business Bureau complaint or a veterinary board complaint or an FDA complaint. And settlements can't prevent them from doing that. And so a lot of clients are like, well, I want to settle, but I still want to file this complaint. And so we help them to ensure, I mean, the settlement can't prevent them, but we just make sure that the language is very clear. And then we help them to file those complaints because that again is like furthering the interests of animals, utilizing the current available resources. So that was another thing I wanted to mention. And then experts are amazing and we use them in so many cases. We actually use them in our Rover case to prove that dogs have been neglected. And so we have to kind of come up with creative ways to use our experts sometimes, but necropsies, so basically an autopsy for an animal, are really important. Utilizing veterinary experts, utilizing we have a case that's going to involve a police training expert. We kind of try to utilize all of those resources because, again, like Jill was saying earlier, a lot of judges don't know anything about this area of law, and also in veterinary malpractice, you have to have a veterinary opinion. Cannot win that case without one, but trying to utilize experts in every single way we can to push the envelope is helpful too.
And that unrelated, but just reminds me because you brought it up. So years ago, we did a lot of federal cases against police officers and police departments for shooting dogs. And we worked a lot with them, not just for the actual, like the justice for the animal, but we would work on like proper training. We would try to like, we're like, look, you don't want to keep killing dogs. You don't want to keep suing you for killing dogs. So like, let's figure this out. And we did that for years. We haven't in a while. And then, but recently, I don't know if any of you saw the Enzo video. It's the husky that was tased. It's like a lot. I mean, it's horrible to watch, but those are our clients. We just recently took, so we're representing Enzo's family against the Lodi Police Department. And I think you still have.
I just wanted to ask, like, I know it's difficult to maybe get at, but excluding animals as like a private property, what does future animal look like?
Like if they're not property.
Yeah, like, what do you guys have?
I don't know that we've talked about this. We probably both have personal opinions on it. I have thought about it for so long because there's sort of how I feel, and then there's like, what do I feel like could actually happen, right? Because I'm like, we also have a nonprofit called Expand Animal Rights Now. It operates alongside a regular law group, and one of the purposes is sort of pushing on the envelope. But so I've thought about it a lot, and if you look at some of the other countries, like great apes have been getting like a specialized status, and it's not persons and it's not property, but like what's in the middle. I know a lot of animal rights attorneys are like, oh, they need to be just like equals, right? Like there's people and there's property, and I totally feel that way, but I don't know, like if I take a hard line and I say that, I don't know that like legislators and judges and stuff are going to go for it. And so I feel like there's probably a middle ground, sort of like a minor child that has a guardian, right? Like I know we were advocating years ago for animal cruelty cases, the criminal cases, rather than it just be like the prosecuting attorney and then the defendant, like with minors counsel and family law, where there's their attorney there that's meant to represent the minor. You're like animal guardian, or somebody that's there to talk about like the animal's interest. So I don't know what the word would be. I feel open. I feel more open now, 15 years later, to like something's better than it is. So I don't know if that answers it, but I feel like it's I don't know. I mean, maybe animals is like its own. Maybe it just that's its own thing, and here's all the rights that they have. Here's how they're protected under law. Like this is where people make the distinction. Like, well, they can't be categorized as people. And some of these arguments make sense. Like, well, they don't need freedom of speech, for example, right? Or somebody could argue, well, like dog barking, whatever, but, so let's say there's people, there's animals, and there's property, right? Those are just factual words, and those might make the most sense, and then, because as people, right, here are all the things we need to do, here's the rights that we need to have, and we learn throughout history, like, some protections we need to protect certain things that we do more. I feel like same with animals, right? Like we can say animals have a basic right to like food, shelter, to be free from neglect. Like, you know, we could come up with the basics and then it would be a new area of law where you push on that and see like what else, you know, what else did they have rights to protect from?
And then actually reminded me of three things. So there's a few different jurisdictions where they are trying to introduce like an animal bill of rights. Unfortunately, I don't think any have gone through yet. They keep getting obviously pushback on it. But it is something we're hoping will get passed everywhere in the future. If you do any reading on like there's a book I think that I both read it. It's like Worldwide View or something of animal law. Basically, you'll find like animals are treated essentially the same way in every single country with some tiny like caveats and nuances, but essentially treated like property everywhere. There again are exceptions, like in India, like cows are very sacred, right? So there's some differences, but overall, pretty much property. And the problem with some of the places, I mean, like foundations and groups and nonprofits who wanted to take a really hard stance and say like, no, animals should be treated exactly the same way as humans. They can't sit in court and like say, I was injured, right? Like that doesn't work. So there has to be something in the middle. As much as I would be like, yeah, they're exactly the same as me. That's one of the reasons I'm vegan, right? I don't believe that animals are less than me. I believe that we're equals. And so I would never like want to hurt or harm an animal because it's my equal. So that's kind of like the same principle, but they can't physically sit in court and be like, this vet, hurt me. And I'm now going to be in pain for the rest of my life. That's never gonna happen unless we come up with some amazing way to like talk to them in their language. But so that's the second thing. And then that brings me to one thing I wanted to mention, but I forgot on domestic violence or domestic violence custody, really, I mean, anything related to animals. The family code has a new provision, 2605, and it talks about in divorce situations when you have an animal that's community property, right? So it's the married couple's property. Then you can assign ownership or care of the animal based on, who's going to provide food, water.
Best interest of the animal.
Yeah, and it doesn't say quote best interest, but it's kind of getting there, right? And so I don't know if you guys know much about family law, but children, when you're dealing with custody, it's a best interest test. So they consider all the different things that are important to children, right? Like not having a parent who drinks tons of alcohol and does drugs, and the parent who's going to instigate and perpetuate frequent and continuing contact with the other parent, and all of these other things. Who's going to be able to best care for the child is considered when you're dealing with custody. So they consider school, they consider health, they consider where the kid lives, all of these different things. And so while it's not quite there with animals, the way that they describe care is like free from neglect and abuse and providing water and shelter. So it's kind of getting there. So you can actually utilizing that provision in our custody cases. It's not controlling authority, right, on a civil court when it's not community property, but it's something we're trying to say is persuasive authority and should be considered.
And I think judges go for it. I do too, because we're like, well, this is a new law, it's in family court, but you should care about that here in civil court for all the same reasons. And
It's worked a lot. And we had one client who was just a potential client who did a consultation with her. She was up north and had a small claims case that was already pending, so she just wanted some advice on how to handle that. It was a custody dispute with her ex, and she brought that provision in front of the court, and the judge basically looked at the guy and said, "What do you have to say about this? And, I don't buy that this is just a piece of property that's one person or the other. You guys need to go out in the hallway and work out a custody arrangement." And they did. Yeah. So I think it's growing. Exciting.
thank you guys. Yeah, thank you guys for sure. Thanks for being interested.
One other question, so sorry. You were talking about settlements, and I was just quickly curious, like what type of tactics do you use to kind of increase damages in settlement? Because I've been kind of interested in settlement recently. I didn't even know there were lawyers that just specialize in settlement, so I just kind of wanted to ask you guys.
There is an attorney we refer sometimes cases to where she refers to us and then she doesn't litigate anymore. She only tries.
Oh, really?
Cheryl, yeah, she normally doesn't want to litigate anymore, but she focuses on trying to settle cases, so.
So, yeah,
She's fantastic.
I would say we're litigation oriented, like, we prep the case for litigation no matter what, and I think our preparation for litigation, we utilize in settlement. So I would say like all the arguments that we're kind of talking about today, we use those in settlement. So, we'll say like, when this case goes to trial, these are the things we're gonna argue, right? So when we file a case, for example, and we put in all these extra causes of action and we request all these damages, we're prepared to litigate that, but it also makes settlement more feasible because you have more of the damages available to you, right? So we will go file a case and the other side files a demur, which is like they're trying to get some of your causes of action kicked out because they have these extra damage provisions. Once we survive that stage, so many cases settle. So even though we advertise as a litigation firm because we are, I would say like if I had to pick a number, I'd say like 80% of cases settle. They might settle early, they might settle middle, they settle on the eve of trial.
And some clients come to us saying, you know, I want to settle this case before filing, and so we really do try, and we're very successful with it, utilizing all of these concepts and, you know, laying it out there very clearly for the insurance companies, because usually we're dealing with insurance companies when we're at that stage.
Yeah, make them afraid of how expensive it's gonna be if they go to trial. And I think probably like a super basic tactic is if you know, we have clients that come to us like, we wanna settle. So we will put forward a pretty reasonable settlement demand early on, like it's kind of like show your cards. And we have clients that are like, I don't care how much this costs, I don't want to settle, I don't care if they give me $1 million, I want to settle. So in those cases, you know, we don't put a ton of effort into settling the case, even though sometimes we try to explain to the client, like, sometimes you're impassioned and you feel like you're gonna get this sense of justice. And it doesn't always, litigation doesn't always feel good, right? It's different for everybody and there's a lot of variables, but, so I would say like we're certainly not specialized in settlement, but I would say compared to a lot of litigation firms, we're very upfront with clients. And I think part of our motivation too is, like we're very hands-on, right? We're a small firm, very passionate about our cases. And for cases that we can settle, we want to, right? Because like, let's say we have like 4 big trials also, it's gonna, you know, we have 82 clients right now. That's a lot. Like that's a lot of clients. So I think, and we're always trying to be mindful of the cost benefit analysis.
And I think in beyond just the financial cost benefit analysis, it's important to consider the emotional component because, you know, most of our clients have come to us with an animal who's deceased, right? And that they went through hell and they're still struggling with it. And so for those clients, even though sometimes they want to litigate, as you start to go through the process and prepare the case, you know, do the settlement discussions, but kind of in the background preparing for litigation, it becomes very apparent that they cannot litigate this case. They will not be able to handle dealing with this for 2-3 years, however long it takes to get to trial. They will not be able to sit for a deposition. They can't handle it. And that's okay and understandable, right? I mean, I would be devastated. I don't think I could handle it. I don't know, maybe I could, but it would be really hard. And so, you know, for those clients, it's really important to have that discussion. Like maybe they are litigation for like gung ho, and then a few months in, they start to realize like they don't think they can handle this. And so you have to have a really frank discussion with them about not just like the financial pros and cons and cost benefit, but also the emotional. And that's something that's slightly different, I think, in this area. I mean, obviously all litigation is very emotional and very difficult. Family law is very hard. And other civil litigation is very hard, but I think, you know, it's particularly difficult in this area.
Maybe that's because we're in.
Maybe that's because we're animal. And the people we represent are animal.
Yeah. And I think there's you have to be realistic too. So there's, you know, people that are like, they come to us and they say, I want to shut down this company. We're like, okay, well, we have to explain civil litigation is not, you're not gonna be able to do that, but we can work alongside the administrative agencies that can do that.
Yeah, I want to stop this vet from practicing.
Yeah, I want to take this vet's license, like, we can tell you how to file a vet board complaint.
We can reach out to, you know, our DA contacts, and we can do what we can do, but there's obviously limits to what you can handle or what you can achieve in a civil case, so. Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome.